Welcome to the Lifestyle Practice Podcast. I'm Steve Vandegraff. I'm going to be your host today. I'm excited to talk with you guys. At the Lifestyle Practice, we coach dentists one-on-one to create a dental practice that supports your personal and family life, rather than having a practice that dominates your personal life. One great way to do that is to improve the profitability of your practice per time worked. And that's what I want to discuss with you guys today. To start off, which practice would you rather own, A or B? Let's go ahead and get this out of the way up front. We assume both offices are doing dentistry the right way, taking care of patients, and are diagnosing ethically, okay? Practice A produces $150K a month or 1.8 a year. It has a bigger team, more patients, more moving parts. Practice B produces 100 a month or 1.2 a year. It has smaller team, fewer patients, and overall just a simpler operation. Now, let's add to that information the overhead. Practice A's overhead is 70%. Practice B's overhead is 50%. Which one would you choose? At first glance, of course, most people initially gravitate to the larger practice. More production feels like more success. But what's actually true? Look at the take-home pay. Practice A produces 1.8 and keeps 30%, which is 540. Practice B produces 1.2, keeps half of it, which is a 600 take-home. So the doctor in the smaller practice with less chaos, fewer patients, less staff, less stress is actually taking home more money. Now, don't get me wrong, I like more production and we certainly want to grow. But the point I want to make today is that bigger does not automatically mean better. Higher production does not automatically mean higher profit. What matters most in the end is just what you keep. I'm going to share a couple pointers today to help you keep more of what you make and improve your overhead. The first thing to understand when talking about overhead is that it's a percentage. It's determined by two numbers, simply income over expenses. But it's funny, a lot of dentists get tripped up when they think overhead, they think of just one of those numbers, your costs. So dentists immediately say, if I want to lower my overhead, the way to do that is to slash expenses. So they'll go out and buy cheap materials. They don't invest back into their office. They'll try to run understaffed. We want to lower expenses, and we'll discuss that. But the other number, if you want to improve your overhead right now, the fastest, most dramatic way to do it is to increase collections. Produce more dentistry. If your practice produces more without your fixed costs changing, your overhead percentage drops immediately. That's the lever with the most power, and that's why we talk mostly about that topic on this podcast. I'm not going to delve into it right now, but I'd recommend you go back and listen to podcasts that address this. How to produce 10K in a day. How to add 100K easily in a year with one simple change. Episodes on case presentation or communication. If you have the Lifestyle Practice Academy, dive into the production module. It really walks you through exactly how to improve your output. All that being said, now that you understand the collections is the easier lever to pull, let's nonetheless go ahead and talk about your costs. Let's just go through the major cost categories in a dental practice, starting with the biggest one by far, staffing. So industry averages in the US for your payroll is usually between 26 and 35%. This basically means your wages, your payroll taxes, benefits, PTO, any compensation tied to your team is in this criteria. If you listen to consultants, you'll often hear 25% is the goal. If you go inside Lifestyle Practice Academy, where we break down overhead numbers, we teach that you really want to get to 20%, a more elite territory. But remember, when we're talking percentages, they can be misleading. Dentists all the time who look at their P&L see that staffing is, say 34%, and they think, oh no, I got to fire someone, cut wages, I need to tighten everything up. But let me give you a clear framework for looking at staff costs, two lenses. Are you adequately staffed, and are you paying the staff appropriately? The first one, being adequately staffed, this simply means you have the right number of employees to help you be as productive as you want to be. When you're early on in your practice, a smaller office, that might be a smaller team. When you're large or you're growing towards large, more team members are normal. But the danger is on both extremes. So if you're overstaffed, you have more people that's necessary. This is super expensive. And I see it all the time working with dentists when we buy an existing practice. It's very often the seller, especially older selling doctors that have been there forever, will have a big team, just too many bodies at the front desk, too many assistants, just lots of people. And that extra payroll, ultimately it's coming out of the doctor's family's pocket. So you don't want to be overstaffed. It's a big investment as it is, just being properly staffed. On the flip side, understaffing. There's dentists who are so cost conscious that they won't hire the extra team members when their office is ready for it and needs it. Hiring an additional assistant, maybe about $175 a day, allows you to see an extra column of patients. That is a no-brainer if you have the demand there. What about the front desk? A lower traffic office can do great with one front desk, but if you're seeing around 25 or more patients per day, I think 2 front desk team members is a lot better. Why? Because it means you're never going to miss a phone call. If you get one more appointment scheduled because you're answering all the phones, that pays for that front desk salary that day, plus a lot more. If you have 2, someone can spend 15 minutes going over a large treatment plan instead of rushing to get back to the front desk to try to check someone out. If you have an extra capable set of hands up front, there's enough time to reach out to patients and follow up on unscheduled treatment, to collect AR, and so on and so on. So the goal here is to be properly staffed. You don't want to be bloated. You don't want to be bare bones. The second point with payroll is paying staff appropriately, and it's just as important. Some dentists overpay their team because they're too agreeable or they feel uncomfortable saying no. So every employee request gets approved, even when it's unrealistic, and the wage creep gets out of control quick. Other dentists are in the opposite direction. They try to save money by paying people less than the going local market rate. And you can guess what happens? They lose their best people to offices that are going to pay better. So how should you approach it? I think the simple philosophy you want to have is you need to have a great practice. You need to have great employees, and great employees expect and deserve great pay. Not inflated or irresponsible pay, but great pay. Personally, I paid my employees at the top of the competitive range in my area. I always make sure I was paying at least a few dollars more than my employees had ever made previously. And that's because I felt it was worth it. I hired great employees who made it worth it. A solid team is going to keep your patients happy. They're going to allow you to produce way more dentistry, and they're going to make your life way less stressful. So if you want strong collections, smooth days, great patient experiences, and really just like a sane life, you need to hire great people and pay them well. Do those things, and then staffing, which is your office's largest expense, is going to become your strongest asset. All right, the next major expense category in most dental offices is the facility costs, which is about nationally on average 7%. So this includes everything tied to the physical space you work in. Your rent or your mortgage if you own the building, your utilities, maintenance, repairs, and I personally, just in my mind, I mentally like to include my practice loan in here as well. This is because it's a fixed, inflexible cost that just comes out of our bank account every single month, no matter how busy or slow we are. These costs are tough since they're much harder to change. What can you actually do to manage these? Well, first of all, you can choose wisely up front before you buy a practice where you're going to practice. So practices in lower cost of living areas often come with lower acquisition prices, lower rent, lower property costs, and that difference can save you tens of thousands of dollars every single year if you're flexible enough to move to one of these areas. Another part is negotiating with the seller and the bank that's doing your financing. If you do that properly in an acquisition right up front, that can save you money down the line. So those are things you can do before you buy your practice to help with this. But you can also, I would recommend every year checking into refinancing. So your practice loan, your student loans, any equipment financing, even your mortgage at home. A 1% difference on most practice loans is going to save you several $1,000s a year. So smart refinancing is one of the easiest wins that you can get in cost savings. And then the last thing in this facility cost that you can do to improve your situation comes around during your lease renegotiation. So this happens every 5 years or so. And this is a moment where people can leave lots of money on the table potentially. Your lease dictates your rent, annual increases, renewal options, and ultimately it's one of your biggest fixed costs for years at a time. So this isn't something you want to wing. I'd recommend bringing in a professional who negotiates dental leases. A great negotiator can save you lots of money over the life of your lease, and the value of that over time is very big. The next category is supplies. This is the first place most dentists look when they're looking to lower their overhead. There's probably bigger fish to fry, as I mentioned before, but let's go ahead and talk about some ways to save money here. First one's really easy, and that's to stay away from the big brands. If you are buying the majority of your supplies from Henry Schein or Patterson, you are paying a massive dental tax. Sure, the rep is friendly, they're bringing you goodies and maybe bailing you out during emergencies, but relying solely on big distributors is one of the fastest ways to overspend. So look at more cost-effective suppliers. There's a few discount people online. You'll get the same or very similar products at a fraction of a price. Find a couple of them and then compare between the two or three. Next principle is to buy in bulk. This is a very easy win. By increasing your order size, your price per unit usually for most vendors drops significantly. I would do this with gloves, Lido, disposable, and we would buy a lot, as in they'd bring in almost a pallet full of bulk supplies. My staff kind of hated those days when the supplies came in because they would have to try to fit the boxes somewhere in the office. But it saved us, thousands of dollars on every order, and we only had to order a few times a year for those things. So bulk buying works. And then another suggestion on this point would be to build just an efficient supply ordering system. Most practices, when you run out of something, you scramble, you might have to overpay with some rush shipping, or you don't really realize what you have, so you may order something that you already have and things expire, or you're just wasting money. You need to have a clear, organized system for ordering stuff. Usually that involves open cabinets, tip-out bins, or anything that makes inventory visually obvious. So your staff can walk into the closet or through the back room, just scan around, and they know very simply when something is running low. And then you want to assign one person to be responsible. If everybody on the team is supposed to order supplies, that's the same thing as nobody is responsible for ordering supplies. So get one organized, shopper-oriented team member to take this on. You go ahead and give them the guidelines. So here are the 3 vendors that we use that are the best. Please scan between them, check for the best price, and then order in bulk every time if it brings the costs down. And then if you want to have a little participation in it, you can say, just put it in the cart and let me know before you place the order. So big picture on supplies is avoid certain vendors, compare, buy in bulk, and create a system. Doing this stuff will save you tens of thousands of dollars a year. Let's move on to lab fees, which, kind of like supplies, usually average about 6% of your collections on the average office. Dentists usually make mistakes with lab costs, again, in 2 opposite ways. They'll use a lab that's way too expensive, or they're going to cut corners and try to save $30 by using a lab that's cheap. And neither extreme is smart. So for the first one, a lot of dentists assume that if a lab charges a premium, the work must be better. And oftentimes really high premium labs can do great custom stuff for cosmetics and such. But in general, bread and butter type dentistry, it was interesting. I visited a really high-end lab in my area where I practice. And I looked at their computers, they were designing crowns on the exact same software that everybody else uses. And they're using the exact same materials, zirconia, Emax, same workflow. So oftentimes with the higher paying options, you may get some nicer customer service, but you're not necessarily getting better restoration. So price doesn't necessarily equal quality. On the other end, like I mentioned, some dentists are willing to cut corners for 20 or 30 bucks. But this usually comes back to bite you because there's usually a lot more mistakes. So you have to do more redos and you may not fully understand what material they're using. So you don't want to do that either. For me, I tried out a few different labs and I settled on basically 2 economy price labs. They use brand name warranted materials. So it was the best material. They were very responsive and they just gave solid results. So I'd recommend you take the same route for your office. Try a couple out, prioritize those things. And then remember, you can negotiate your pricing with labs. Don't just accept the first price sheet, kind of like insurance companies just give you their fee schedule. Instead, just ask for a promotional rate, ask if you can have the DSO or a preferred provider fee schedule. I remember I was doing a lot of units every month and I called my lab and let them know what I was doing and asked for the DSO fee schedule and they gave it to me. So you'd be surprised how many labs will lower fees just because you ask and negotiate. The next is marketing. So the average for marketing is about 4 to 5% nationally, but what is the right percentage? It really just depends. Obviously, a big factor is new patients. If you're getting 0 to 20 new patients a month, you need to be investing heavily into marketing. This is your growth phase. Your practice needs awareness and visibility and some momentum. So you want to invest at least a few, maybe several $1,000s monthly until you ramp up your patient acquisition and have steady patients coming in. But even if you're getting a lot of new patients, let's say you're getting 40 or 50 new patients a month, you may feel you get to save money now because you don't have to spend on marketing, which is sort of true. But even then, it's possible you're losing potential collections because your marketing would have brought in more dentistry than you're currently doing. So you keep investing, you just shift the tone of your marketing towards higher value procedures, implants, sedation, clear aligners, cosmetic dentistry. In my opinion, you should invest marketing as long as you have a positive ROI, no matter how many new patients you're getting, no matter how much collections you have coming in each month. So early on in your practice, your marketing should be several percent of your P&L. And even later on, I would still earmark at least a few $1,000s towards those things I just mentioned. All right, the last overhead category to talk about is administrative expenses. These usually make up 4 to 6 on average percent of your collections. This is basically office supplies, the premiums for all the different insurances you have to carry, software subscription, professional fees. And individually, none of these really feel huge in and of themselves, but collectively, they kind of add up fast, especially if you're not paying attention. So a couple tips to help on these type of expenses. First of all, I'll tell you what not to do. Don't just start cutting things you actually need, trying to save money here. You don't want to skip out on things that make your office, particularly your front desk, more efficient. You want to invest in those tools that help increase production and simplicity in your life. Certainly don't cut out, insurance that protects you. And then another tip is don't go on autopilot, give them your credit card and you never look at them ever again. Instead, do an annual audit of all of your recurring expenses. This is a super easy, kind of overlooked way to stay lean. You can do it when you get your annual P&L or after taxes, but go ahead and do a sit down and just go through all of your recurring expenses in your practice. When things are on autopay, you often, like I mentioned, stop noticing them. Companies love to raise prices quietly after the first 12 months of working together. And you might even be paying for services that you just don't use anymore. You just forget about them, out of sight, out of mind. So ask yourself 3 questions as you go through these lists. Do we still use this? If not, cut it immediately, obviously. Are we getting the value we're paying for it? If not, then downgrade it or replace it. And if you're using it, can we at least get a better price? So again, negotiate. You or your front desk, even better, call the vendors. Point out any price increases. Ask to take advantage of promotions, ask for a loyalty discount. Oftentimes, just asking that customer service rep that doesn't really care about their big corporation is an easy way for you to get a lower price subscription. One last little tip on this one would be for insurances, at least, kind of like you can bundle your home and auto insurance. Personally, at my practice, I bundled my malpractice, business liability, and workers' comp all under the same group, and putting them together, it saved a pretty surprising amount, which over several years turns into a really nice chunk of change. So I would look into that too. But those are the main categories of a P&L expense that you're dealing with as a dentist. Hopefully, these tips will give you a big picture idea and plan of how to bring down those costs and tighten up your overhead. If you're working with me or my partners, Matt or Derek, send over your P&L and we can go through it line by line and see how you measure up and where you may be missing out on savings. One last point I'm going to make on overhead, and that is, remember, overhead's a percentage, but I really like to think of it in break-even terms. So basically, your break-even is all the costs that I just explained, sum them up. That is your break-even point, your total costs for your practice that month. You need to know that number, by the way, know it well. You want to keep that as manageable as possible. And then just think everything above that number is profit. So one thing about dentistry is most of our costs are fixed. Here's a simple way my friend Brian Hanks illustrates fixed costs. Let's say you go to your office tomorrow. The building's still there, the lights are on, your whole team's there, you guys are ready to go, but no patients show up all day. All the costs that you still have to pay for that day are fixed. So your rent, utilities, insurance, software, payroll, those are your fixed costs. The only costs that really change when you perform more dentistry are supplies and lab fees. I mean, if your practice grows a lot and you're adding team members, eventually that number will change, but your marginal increase in output has very little increased costs for you as a dentist. So the more dentistry you do, almost all of it is profit. The game becomes keep your break-even number as low and lean as reasonably possible, and then crush your production above that point each month. Personal example, when I bought my practice, it was doing middle to lower numbers, but it had a fairly lean overhead, about 50%. Over the next few years, we doubled production, then doubled it again. But the cool thing is my costs, they did not quadruple or anything close to it. I added a front desk, I added an assistant and 2 columns of hygiene. So our payroll had a moderate increase. Our lab fees, of course, went up a little bit since we're doing more dentistry. But everything else, all my fixed costs, they didn't increase at all. So my take home went way, way up. And that's the power of fixed costs plus smart growth. So just remember, when you're thinking about overhead, it's not really about cutting articulating paper in half and trying to use less cotton rolls during each appointment. It's the mindset of making smart financial decisions when you're spending on your team, on your practice, and all those categories that we just talked about, and coupling that with intentional, hardworking production where you're doing large numbers over a controlled and lean cost number. That's the way to have a very profitable practice. And when you do this, when you get your practice in this situation, and then you put a couple years under your belt in this setup, that's when financial independence or earlier retirement start to become more of a reality. If you'd like help making your practice more productive, if you need help identify where you can save on costs and where you can improve your production, that's obviously what we do. So please reach out, Matt, Derek, or Steve at thelifestylepractice.com. You can go to our website, thelifestylepractice.com. There's a submission link there. Go ahead and click it, and you can enter in information about your practice, about what you accomplish. We'll respond and weigh in on your situation and see if there's any solutions that could help you. With that, everyone, thanks for listening and have a great week.